This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, this is Dylan Hackworth.
This is Maureen Bogey.
And you have landed smack dab in the Creep Street arena, and boy, oh boy, what a day it is.
What a day.
This is something we look forward to. It happens twice a year.
Yes, it sure does.
It sure diggly dang does.
And it's just an absolute favorite of ours to make and hopefully for you guys to listen to.
Absolutely. Before we get started, of course, like, follow, subscribe, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod. We're also on TikTok. On our Facebook, there's another group called Citizens of the Milky Way, a Creep Street fan page where daily we like to interact with our listeners, post memes, all that stuff. And of course, if once a week is not enough,
and it's not,
you just head on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast for all sorts of goodies. Now, Maureen, what I love about these episodes, too, is when we do them, it means we're putting out 2 episodes.
Right.
Because we always put these out midweek rather than our typical Friday release. Mm-hmm. So that means folks are going to get a double dose of the Creep Street this
That's
week.
right. We are double dipping, citizens.
That's right, baby. We are double dipping. And I think we have about 7 stories, to tell.
Yeah, I believe so. So thank you so much to everyone who reached out and sent us stories, sent us experiences, sent us questions, sent us ideas. We really appreciate all of it. Even though we are releasing this now, just know that we are open to hearing your stories at any time.
Yes, and if you happen to send one in and for whatever reason we missed it, we're so sorry. Just send us a message letting us know we missed it because we'll be doing this again around the holiday season.
Yeah,
Part
and
5.
we'll add you in there. Yeah, so if you sent us something and you don't hear it today, that was a mistake.
Yes.
Okay.
It wasn't intentional. We didn't mean to.
Yeah, so reach back out to us. And that really goes for anything. If you guys try to contact us and we don't respond, it was a mistake. And
Yes.
please reach out again.
Maureen, I am ready. I think I'm going to kick things off here.
Okay.
This comes from one of our longtime listeners from over in the UK. Guys, he's been listening to us for a while.
A king.
Yes, the man's name is Luke Melly, a.k.a. York Knife. He crafts outdoor tools, specifically knives, as the title will tell you. I believe he's based there in York, UK, and really cool stuff. We follow him on Instagram.
Yeah.
Sometimes I like to watch his like making of videos and stuff. They're really cool stuff. So check him out for all your outdoorsmanship needs.
Yeah.
But this is a story from Luke Melly in York, UK. So I grew up in an old house in York. Old York, not New York. All these events happened from the ages of around 5 to me leaving when I was 18. When I say an old house, I mean around 250 years. The place had been a lot of things in the past: a telephone exchange, bed and breakfast, coach house, and I'm sure many, many more. And York has more than its fair share of spooky happenings in history. My parents used to joke that the old paving stones going down to the courtyard to what we called the forge, which I think was something to do with when it was a coach house and the horses would need tending, were actually upturned gravestones, which, I've got to be honest, freaked the crap out of me as a little boy. Growing up, the house always felt odd, a little foreboding. I'd always feel as though someone was there when I was alone, which always put me on edge when I was younger, and even when I was a grown man when I'd later come home to babysit my younger brothers. The house had long landings upstairs, with a lot of doors coming off it to one of the 12 bedrooms that my parents had put a lot of effort into converting it into a bed and breakfast. My folks bought the house and then the neighbor's house, which at one time had been all one building, but someone in the past had bricked a wall up on the landing and sold them separately, I'd guess to make more money. The place had a whole driveway going through the middle of it, which would have been there for horses and coaches to drive through a long time ago to get to the courtyard. The landing went over this whole driveway through the building. This landing would always appear dark at one end or the other, and I could always feel my walking pace getting faster the further I walked down there, always feeling like I was walking away from someone at the end. I very rarely look behind myself because of this feeling, too scared to look and potentially see something. On an evening when I was in bed, I would often wake up to hear someone walking down the long landing in the early hours of the night. The old floorboards creaking gently for whoever or whatever was there. This would happen when I knew everyone in the house was tucked up neatly in bed. It's something I remember vividly about my early years there, as the bedrooms had very heavy doors which would make a lot of noise, letting you know when someone was going to the toilet at night. The footsteps would also just stop on the landing as if someone was just standing there, waiting. As you can imagine, this often made going for a nighttime toilet break a little ominous. I would often find myself moving bedrooms at my parents' request, and one in particular, which we always called Room 8. This room gave me a reoccurring nightmare which lasted for the 2 years that I was using that bedroom. I'd be chased by a horrible-looking creature that looked really old, and there would always be a clock involved somehow, or I'd not be able to move while I was subject to something moving in the room. These dreams would always be terrifying to me as a boy, and to be honest, when I look back, they still are, especially when I know when I moved from this room to another in the house, these dreams stopped abruptly. Yes, of course, I told my parents, but they were parents in the mid-1980s, so didn't have a lot of patience for talk like this back when parents would smoke around their kids and dish out the smack bum for being naughty. Simpler times. When I was a little older, I'd overhear my parents every now and then talk about things in their bedroom being moved in the night. The bedroom would have looked great in the house's heyday, as they had decent-sized fireplaces in them. They complained that the trinkets on the mantelpiece of the fire would, in the night, move to the bedside table. This would happen while they were in there, but they never witnessed it. They'd make light of it when it happened, but I was by then old enough to see they had been spooked a little, as well as this was their way of coping with it. The juicy part of my story centers around a noise. In particular, the sound of 4 or 5 keys of a piano being played a couple of times when it's quiet at night. The first time it happened, it was in the middle of the night. In the morning, I asked my mom if she had heard it, and she said no and not to worry, as it would have just been a TV or something. Shortly after that, she heard it as well. Again, she made light of it, as that was just our way, but I knew she knew. It became a thing that just happened, and we even had some guests staying in the bed and breakfast who brought it up one morning. They asked who was playing the piano in the middle of the night and how beautiful it sounded. There were nervous laughs from them when my mom mentioned we didn't have a piano. I heard the noise several times and wasn't as scared, so to speak, but the last time it happened, I was in a back room by myself in the middle of the day, moving things from there into my new bedroom, which coincidentally later had glow-in-the-dark Ghostbuster wallpaper put up. God bless the 1980s. I've probably got 4 different types of cancer from that glow-in-the-dark paper, but goddamn, my friends thought I was cool for a short while. Anyway, I was there loading my arms up with bric-a-brac, the sort of stuff that a 9-year-old boy cherishes but an adult wouldn't see the value in, when I felt ever so slightly cold. And then the noise started. As clear as day, a piano playing 4 or 5 keys over and over, and it was close. Very close. Too close for it to have been a radio, a TV, or noise from the neighbors. I was under no illusion this was not something I should be a witness to. I was rooted to the floor and my legs in a moment felt like lead weights. My only thoughts were, how the fuck do I get from this back room to my parents, who are out at the other side of the house decorating my new room, without running into something I had absolutely no desire to see? I could tell from the sound that I would have to go through the area that it came from to exit the building, and into what I perceived to be safety, which was through the back room, through the kitchen, and then through the dining room and into the courtyard, a task that seemed impossible. I heard the noise over and over, and then silence. I remained there for another 5 to 10 seconds, which felt like hours to me, before dropping everything I'd carefully stacked in my arms and making a run for it. My legs hardly worked and now felt like jelly as I screwed my face up to limit my vision as I ran the short distance. I could feel tears running down my face as I exited the kitchen, thinking to myself, as soon as I leave the kitchen, I'd see something terrifying, like in my dreams before, but thankfully, there was nothing. I ran as fast as my short boy legs would manage to my mom and dad, who were both standing there watching me on the ground floor. I'm sure thinking, what the fuck is up with him now? As I blurted out about the piano keys and being trapped and how clear as day it was, like it was next to me, with tears streaming down my face. Looking back, and even then at the time, I could tell they knew what I was on about, as they both gave each other a long, knowing look before comforting me. I felt exhausted and refused to go back into that side of the house for some time without them, unwilling to potentially subject myself to that experience again. Shortly after this happened, we did in fact get a piano gifted to us from my grandma's house, who was trying to make room at her home in her old age, and we never heard any more noise from a piano after that. I still to this day remember every emotion that went through me in those early times, and there was somewhat of a feeling of relief when I left home at 18 years old, glad to see the back of that place that gave me so many chills growing up. Later in life, my family used to talk about it every now and again, and dealt with it the only way we knew how, by making lighthearted comments about it all and poking fun at each other. Although this is no infield poltergeist story, at the time it shook me, especially the dreams, and even now at 42 years old, I often think about what the dreams, the feeling of anxiety in the place, and the noise, which, although never harmed me or anyone else, was always disconcerting to hear. I often wonder if the timing of the noise lined up with any major events in our family, whether they are good or bad. But the dates and events are now lost to time. Wow, wow, wow.
What a cool, interesting story.
Well, what I find so interesting is the irony of the piano stopped once they actually got a piano.
Right.
It's almost like someone who used to live there was a piano player, and it was like their way of saying, hey, can we get a piano in here?
Right.
You know what I mean? And now that they actually had one, they could be quiet in a weird way.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's freaky.
Or it's them, this entity is trying to freak them out, and they know that that is scarier when there isn't the thing there that makes it possible. So then once it got there, then maybe they moved on to something else. I don't know.
Well, I would be interested to know what those 4 to 5 notes were. And if you were to, on that piano that's actually there, pluck out those 4 to 5 notes, if something would happen.
Right.
If you almost respond to it in a way.
I don't know. That is interesting. Such like a, like you said, it isn't an Enfield poltergeist or whatever like that.
Right.
But it doesn't matter though, because it's like, it still has that same level of kind of confusion and just weirdness to it, that like it still is its own. This is like a big story, I think.
Absolutely. I'm just so fascinated. And I don't know why I'm hung up on those notes. I would be interested to see if someone were to, if you could find out what that jingle was. Mm-hmm. If it's an existing song that was like maybe someone's favorite or something, and that's why you hear it. I would be curious what would happen if you were to play those 4 or 5 notes, if it would elicit a response.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, Maureen, what do you got for us here? Luke, thank you so much for sending that in. What a great story.
Yes, thank you.
Once again, check out York Knife on Instagram. Very, very cool stuff. Now, Maureen, what do you got here?
Okay, I have a cool story from, it's either Cherry or Sherry. Sorry, I don't know which one is correct, but Cherry Andrews. Thank you so much for sending this in.
Yeah.
Here we go. I saw that you were taking submissions for personal stories. I have been meaning to tell you one of mine that whenever I tell, I automatically get goosebumps all over again. I used to live in an area called Dunhead in London. There's a big overgrown graveyard, one of the magnificent 7 cemeteries. One morning on my walk to work on a snowy winter morning, I was walking past the cemetery gates when I noticed walking by towards me a dark figure with nothing to distinguish it by. I started to get scared, but my curiosity took over, and so I kept walking towards it. As it got about 3 cars away, it walked from behind a car and completely vanished. It was a long road with homes opposite the cemetery and with no alley or streets to cut into. The car door and the lights were not activated or opened, and when I walked past the car, I was completely confused. I still remember that 6-foot figure, completely shrouded in black, vanish. It happened about 3 times over the course of 8 months. It happened 8 years ago.
Very fascinating.
Yes.
Obviously, the cemetery kind of makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
who knows if it's related? It could be coincidence, but you would think, hey, cemetery.
Yeah, you gotta think it's probably related to the cemetery.
Interesting that this was 8 years ago, and it happened 3 times over an 8-month period, but then stopped, unless she moved or something.
Right.
She said she used to live there.
Right.
I know it makes me wonder if that would keep happening. I don't know when she moved, if all of a sudden it stopped. And I wonder if it did the same. We'll have to follow up. Did it do the same thing 3 times? Like get so close and then die behind a car?
Right.
Or did it like disappear in different ways each time?
Right.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, you hear a lot about these stories about there's like a black figure or cloaked figure
Yeah.
in graveyards or in cemeteries. Like, we hear about this all the time. I believe there's even some yokai that are kind of like this. Like, it makes sense to me, you know?
Absolutely. Very freaky.
Thank you so much for sending that story in. We're so appreciative. And what a cool story. What a weird experience.
What a great story. Yes. All right, Maureen. And actually, I was wrong. I believe there's 8 stories altogether today. Maureen, what do you got next for us?
Next, I have a cool little experience from Nikki Ivy, a fantastic listener. We appreciate you so much.
Long-time listener. Once again, kind of like the Dream James Watkins, kind of like York Knife. Kind of one of the first people that really kind of reached out to us within a few months of starting the podcast to be like, hey, I really love your stuff. Always happy to have her as a listener. And Maureen, spill the porridge.
Okay. Nothing too real or hectic, but good for a laugh. My son Sasha is about to turn 3, so he's small. He was in bed doing some weird Illuminati hand-eye hole gesture the other night while I was laying in bed. I had already tucked him in and went to check in on him because I heard him chatting softly to himself. He'd been doing this for a while now, a couple of nights. So I sat on his bed and I asked him what he was doing and where did he learn it from. He then pointed to the ceiling and said, "From the ghost up there, Mama." When he was even smaller, a similar situation. I went in to check on him after he had been put to sleep, and he pointed to the ceiling and asked me if I could see the giant bird right there. "Look, Mama." I'm chalking it up to his imagination. I never know. We live in an apartment and there's constant creaks and noises and shadows. Don't know if it's the neighbors or not, though. My kid also loves anything Halloween, so he watches a lot of Halloween cartoons. So might just be that influence. But maybe not.
Well, a big happy birthday to Sasha.
Yes.
That's awesome. Funny that he mentioned a bird-like creature, because that's come up a couple of times. Which you did the episode. What was the haunting where like a bird
of
popped
Hellfire Farm, I believe.
That's right, Hellfire Farm.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yes, fascinating stuff.
Once again, Nikki Ivy, so happy to have you as a listener, and welcome to the States, and happy birthday, Sasha. Well, I guess I could dish one up for you.
Please, we would just adore that.
Now, this one comes from South Africa. This was sent in to us from listener Lucas Breet. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but he is a podiatrist.
Yes.
According to his Instagram, and he sent us a pretty cool story.
Yes, thank you so much for being a listener. We just love having you with us, and we really appreciate it.
South Africa has always been, outside of the United States, one of our biggest hubs for listeners.
It has been, which is so funny. I don't really know how this has happened, but I'm so glad that it has.
Yeah.
What can I say? We're friggin' lucky, honey.
And what a beautiful, we cannot wait to visit. We will, I mean, obviously, we want to bring Creep Street on the road. We'll come to the UK. We'll come to all those places, but South Africa will definitely be on that list. Mm-hmm. So here it is. From Lucas Breet in South Africa. I've been listening to you guys back to back for the last few weeks, and it's been reminding me of an experience I had while in high school. My mother, brother, and I moved into a brand new apartment in Boksburg, South Africa. We had gone through a bit of a rough patch the years prior, and this was the start of a new chapter for us. The experience started a few months after moving in. Every night when I went to bed, I would be tucked in. It would start at my feet and work its way up to my head, tucking me in firmly. At first, I was freaked out, but at no point did I fear for my safety. Eventually, I started keeping my eyes open when it happened, as I thought it may have been my grandmother, but at no point did I ever see the entity. Could this have been some kind of poltergeist that either my brother and I were conjuring? Since finishing high school and moving out of the apartment, I've not had any other experiences. I hear she's been making a reappearance. Anyway, keep up the great work. I'm still looking forward to your Uniondale episode. And then I asked him, I just reached out with a follow-up, did these experiences only happen at night? And he responded saying, yes, only at night before falling asleep, and only in my high school years. Have not had any major experiences. So interesting.
Wow.
That would seem like, if it's not like a loved one he knew personally, maybe just someone who lived there that was a particularly just kind of warming presence, who maybe they were a nanny of some kind or a grandma themselves or just a loving parent. It seems like it seemed like it was being nice to him. It didn't seem like it was tricking him into, so that's kind of lovely when you hear those.
Yeah, it's always nice to hear those stories. You don't hear them all that often, but I love it when you do. And it's so interesting too that that's kind of like the only experience he's had. He hasn't had experiences since then.
Yeah, very interesting.
Because usually people, if they have one, they'll have multiple. They'll have more than one, but not always.
And I like that he threw out the idea that maybe this was some sort of poltergeist entity that he or one of his siblings maybe conjured. Because obviously when we talk about poltergeists on this show, it's the most extreme of the extreme.
Right.
It's when they're picking you up and throwing you around and doing shit like that. But I guess there's nothing to say a milder poltergeist could, especially if it, if it's coming from a person, that a milder form of a poltergeist couldn't be conjured. And because I'm sure it's like the news, you really only get to hear about bad news. You know what I mean? Right. So maybe there is these many more cases of these very light poltergeist hauntings that maybe in some cases are so subtle that the average person doesn't even think twice about it because they just aren't in tune with the paranormal world or whatnot. So interesting to think about.
Very interesting to think about. Thank you so much for sending that story. We so appreciate it. And thank you for listening, listening back to back. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
And very excited to, that's one we've been recommended a few times, the Uniondale Hitchhiker, a famous South African tale.
We got to do that.
For those who might not know, we've way back, I think it was like episode 20 or something, we did the Tokoloshi, incredible South African lore. We can't wait. We got to get back over there.
Oh, we sure do.
And it kind of reminds me, we had another listener from Durban, South Africa. They didn't send in a story. This was just an episode recommendation, but from Miles Kristen on Instagram. Thank you again for being a listener. They requested something called Highway Sheila, which I guess is a very popular, well-known legend about a hitchhiking ghost that lives over like in the eastern side of South Africa. Because I said, is this in any way related to the Uniondale hitchhiker? And I guess the Uniondale hitchhiker is more associated with the western side with like the Cape and stuff.
Oh, interesting.
So very interesting. All right. Well, Maureen, this next one comes from a Dustin Riffle on Instagram.
Incredible. Thank you so much for joining us and for being a listener. We're so appreciative and you're the best.
This one is pretty cool. This one happened right here in the United States. Let's get into it. From Dustin Riffle. Hey guys, got a little bite-sized listener story. So a little while after the passing of my grandma, me and my dad were up at her house in Tennessee, seeing what needed to be taken back with us and getting it ready to move everything out, so we decided to stay the night as it would be easier than renting a hotel. My dad said that later that night, after we had went to bed, and later he woke up without me in the bed with him, so naturally, he got up to find me and told me that he found me at the kitchen table and asked what I was doing up. What I said was what is so interesting. I was talking to Grandma, and she said everything would be okay. As far as I know, my father doesn't really believe in the paranormal, but I find it hard to believe that he would lie about something so serious to him, and especially so soon after the passing. I was super young at the time and haven't really started thinking about it until I got more into ghosts when I was older. Very interesting.
Wow, another one of these kind of positive stories.
You're right. It was sort of like Grandma talking through, not talking through him, but just giving him a message that, wow.
I love that.
That's always nice to hear those kinds of messages.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's so true, too, that when you're a kid, you don't really think that much of it. So at the time, it makes sense that it just wasn't really something that took up much of his attention.
Right, exactly.
But as he got older and got more into this stuff, I mean, yeah, this is so interesting.
Once again, big thank you to Dustin Riffle for sharing with us.
Yes, thank you. What a cool story.
Now, Maureen, this next one's kind of interesting. This wasn't so much a personal story, but something someone kind of sent to us to kind of share. It's something about their hometown, or at least near their hometown, like a local weird oddity.
Yeah. She said it's near a friend's hometown. And so this is from listener Aaron Hitson. Thank you so much for listening. We are so appreciative of you, and you're a star.
Oh, yeah.
So what Aaron told me about is something called Spook Hill. And this is in Lake Wales, Florida, in central Florida.
Okay.
What it is it's a gravity hill. And a gravity hill is a place where the layout of the surrounding land produces an optical illusion, making a slight downward slope appear to be an uphill slope. And there's this place called Spook Hill that is one of these gravity hills. And it has an interesting legend tied to it. And I will tell you that legend right now.
Okay.
Now, Spook Hill is so ingrained in the Central Florida heart.
Oh, okay.
That in April of 2019, Spook Hill was added to the National Register of Historic Places.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So here is the legend that is behind Spook Hill.
Ooh, let's hear it.
This is coming from visitcentralflorida.org.
Okay.
Legend has it that a Native American tribe in the area was being harassed by a giant alligator. They sent the warrior chief to fend off the beast. Following his brave battle to the death, the chief was buried on the north side of the hill. Years later, pioneers hauling goods from the army trail noticed that their horses strained at the foot of the ridge, even though it appeared to be going downhill. This eerie occurrence is why they started to call the area Spook Hill. So we need to know, is the gator seeking revenge, or is the chief protecting his land? I don't know. But apparently, what it really is a weird-ass optical illusion.
Really? Okay.
But this place, Spook Hill, has a legend to it. It has, like, a ghost right next to it, it looks like, if you go visit it. I mean, it's pretty cute.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, I had saw something about how trucks, if you put them in neutral, they'll almost roll uphill.
Yes.
But it's not really rolling uphill. It's part of the optical illusion.
Right, exactly.
It sounds interesting.
It's very interesting. It's weird. So thank you so much, Aaron, for sending that in.
Yes.
Now we have a big shout out to give to the maniacal Laura Maynard.
Give it on up. Obviously a supporter of the podcast, a supporter of the Patreon, but also a hilarious performer. We get to perform with her sometimes at Second City. She's world class.
So talented.
And boy, oh boy, did she share with us a freaky story.
Yes, she sure did.
Ooh.
Thank you so much to Laura for sending this in. You are a dream.
Yes.
I was in Paris in 2019 with 4 friends and a 5th new friend who we had met through another mutual pal. This 5th friend, Giselle, lived in Paris, was fluent in French, and overall an incredible addition to our little crew that showed us all around the city. One night we were all hanging around at the base of the Sacré-Cœur near our Airbnb. We decided to get some ice cream. So we walked over to the busier street where we found an ice cream shop. So we got our ice cream and were sitting/leaning on benches in the street talking and eating. The place was bustling. It was either Friday or Saturday night right on Easter weekend. Suddenly, all 5 of us felt a really bizarre shift in mood. When I think back on the moment in the busy street, it feels like the sound got dialed down a little bit. We looked up and a woman who looked relatively quote-unquote normal, except maybe a bit disheveled, kind of like a drunk might after a long night, This woman was several yards away from us with the glare locked so tightly on our group. When she looked at us, I felt what I can only describe as evil, just pure evil in her eyes. It was only when we started to get much closer that I saw her broken bottle in her hand. She beelined for Giselle, muttering something in French, got right in Giselle's face, like practically nose to nose. The other 5 of us were alarmed and tried to stop her, but we were afraid of the weapon in her hand, and it was all happening so fast, and we really managed to say, "Hey, and what are you doing?" Finally, Giselle had been speaking in English, but yelled at her in French, "Leave us alone. Go away." The woman turned and, still staring at our group, let out a laugh. This laugh still haunts me. God, it was just so maniacal. She turned, and then the weirdest thing seemed to be completely normal. She joined what looked like a group of friends, laughing normally, not evil, and didn't look back at us. We were in shock and didn't understand what happened, but Giselle especially was in hysterics. We decided she needed to come back and spend the night with us at our Airbnb, and she should go home whenever she felt safe. We arrived back, and we all agreed what we had witnessed was something evil. Giselle, who we had only met a few days prior, confided in us that she had many spiritual encounters in her life, and since she was very young, could sometimes sense it in others. That moment stuck with me. As we were all talking about the presences we had felt throughout our lives, was when I mentioned my grandfather. I never met my mom's dad, and he died pretty abruptly a month after I was born. The last conversation my mother and he had was about his plans to come and meet me in the coming weeks. He is a big inspiration for me, and my mom has always felt sad that we never met. But I told Giselle and my friends that night that I always had this nagging feeling that he and I had met. Giselle looked at me and said, "He did come to see you. One night you were asleep in your crib. He came in and held you." I was sobbing. She was right. As soon as I heard it, I knew it had happened.
Wow. Once again, it's this scary story, menacing story, but then kind of ends on a happy note.
On a happy, really pleasant, remarkable note. But Lord, that is such a crazy story and so freaky. So it's like, was this person possessed maybe? That it was like possessed by like a spirit that had been kind of haunting Giselle or something like that?
Right.
That just possessed this woman briefly, and then that's why she was able to just go back to reality so quickly?
Yeah, very weird.
Yeah, a fascinating story. And then that's so cool that she was able to kind of confirm this feeling like she had met her grandfather before and that he did come in and held her while she was, small enough to be in a crib still. That's really sweet.
Yeah, that was very sweet. And Laura, thank you so much for sharing that story.
Yes.
We love you. Thank you for being a listener, and we'll see you soon.
Yes, please.
Now, this next story is kind of our last story, but it's kind of broken up into different parts. This one comes from our newest Patreon subscriber, the Beast, Benjamin Huang.
Yes, thank you so much for sending your stories. We are so grateful to have you as a listener. You're amazing. Thank you. And thank you for being a Patreon subscriber too. I mean, gosh, good golly gosh.
So happy to have him. And this is coming all the way from Singapore.
Whoa.
So here we go. Hey, Creep Street. I've got a couple of pretty short stories, which you may or may not be interested in. No hard feelings if they aren't what you're looking for. I work as a doctor in Singapore and have a few from my work at various hospitals. Operating theater. As a student, I did a short few months of internship in a Malaysian hospital. It's a fairly large public hospital that serves a very large community in the area. The hospital itself was not very well maintained. The halls were constantly dim, the stairs a little musty, and the floors peppered with potholes, which were just covered over in thin linoleum, which really did nothing when I pushed these large patient beds over them. It's the kind of hospital with red brick everywhere, staircases instead of elevators, and the psychiatric ward is still behind literal metal bars. I was part of the anesthesia and intensive care team, and we spent most of our time in the operating theaters or in the intensive care unit. The operating theaters were large, but again, not terribly well maintained. The machines were just shy of ancient, and it was always just a little too warm to feel sterile. The anesthesiast for the case would get to sit on a plastic stool in the corner, and I, as the lowest ranking life form, aka medical student, would get a cardboard box. One day, in between cases, I was sitting on a box in one of the operating rooms doing a bit of self-study. All the machines were powered down and turned off at the wall. The ventilator has a balloon attached to it, which we call a test lung. We use this to test if air is flowing correctly through the machine. This is usually deflated when the machine is turned off and left just sitting idly on the counter. So I'm in this quiet operating theater, semi-squatting on a cardboard box, no one else around, and I hear this mechanical noise which sounded a bit like the breaths the ventilator would do. I look up, and the ventilator is still turned off. The lights are off. The pumps are moving. So I know there's no airflow through the machine. I figured it's just me being creeped out by nothing. But as I'm looking at it, the test lung starts inflating slowly, then deflating again, like someone is breathing on the other end. It starts off a little bit slow, then the next breath gets bigger, and bigger again, until the test lung is fully inflated while the machine is totally turned off. It looks like someone is just breathing on the other end of the machine, but there is no patient in the room and nobody else there other than me. And I'm just staring at this thing until it fills up all the way and suddenly rolls off the counter. That's when I booked it out of the room. It wasn't really the kind of thing you tell your supervisor, so I just kept mum about it. But later that posting, I had another experience in one of the clinic rooms. These rooms are set up a little funny where we can have 2 doctors seeing 2 different patients at the same time, and the patients are seated back to back. It wasn't the best for patient confidentiality. The rooms had these wooden doors to them which led out to the waiting area, and this waiting area was a really large open space with some benches and stuff. The wooden door itself had a really high gap below it because it was just a little bit crappy. So this gap would easily be about 8 or 10 centimeters high. If anyone was standing outside, you'd definitely know. And it was just finished off with this simple metal door handle, which was a little bit creaky and stuck with rust. So it took a little bit of effort to yank the handle down and open the door. All very luxurious. So we were just seeing patients that day. I wasn't even late, maybe around 12 p.m. or 1 p.m., and we were just wrapping up the morning clinic with the last couple of patients. The waiting area was empty save for the reception staff at the far end, but the consultation room had a bunch of us squeezed into it. 2 patients, 2 doctors, and me, the student. We were in the midst of the consult when the door handle just went crazy. Like someone was on the other side really trying to get in, but they really couldn't. All 5 of us were staring at this handle just going up and down really violently, but there were no feet or shadows under the door. The door itself was rattling from the force of the door handle jiggling, but whoever or whatever was on the other side could not seem to get in. The sound stopped as abruptly as they started, and I got up to check who it was. The door handle was once again quite rusty and jammed, no idea how it seemed to be flipping about so easily just seconds before. I got the door open and poked my head out of the room into the waiting area, but there was no one there. If the culprit had ran off, I would have definitely seen them as it was a really large open space and it would have taken them at least a few seconds to run out of the exit a good 20 meters away. Went back into the room, reported my findings or lack thereof, and oddly, everyone just shrugged it off and continued like nothing happened. Wow, so that's story 1.
Whoa.
Okay, freaky. I especially that handle. And hey, at least like the doctors he was with saw it and everything. Because then he could have because that would be shitty to like feel like you couldn't tell anyone that.
Right.
Oh, but we got more.
Oh my gosh, this is crazy.
Now this next story happened in a high dependent unit. This is from the hospital I currently work in and have been working in for the last 8 years. We have a surgical high dependency ward on the 6th floor, which treats some of our sicker patients who have undergone surgery. This ward commonly has 4 beds to a room, with 2 closer to the windows and 2 closer to the corridor. There are also 2 isolation beds at the far end of the ward for patients who need to be isolated due to some contagious condition, or for their own protection if their immune system is compromised for some reason. We had this gentleman, let's call him Mr. A, who came in for a simple gallbladder issue. He didn't really have any contagious condition, and neither was he immunocompromised. But we were a bit short on bed space and put him up in the isolation room at the back of the ward. The room itself wasn't exactly palatial, but it had the hospital bed and a smaller armchair in the corner. Every morning we would see Mr. A and encourage him to sit out in the chair rather than lie in bed, as mobility would greatly speed up his recovery. And initially he seemed quite compliant. But after 2 days or so, we would go in to check on him in the mornings, and the chair would be turned around to face the wall. I would go in, turn the chair back around, and encourage him again to sit in the chair. At the beginning, he would just wave us off and tell us he would do so later. And the next morning, the chair would be turned around to face the wall again. But as the week wore on, he seemed more agitated and even scared when I turned the chair around. I finally asked him why he kept turning the chair to face the wall, since I was getting kind of tired of turning it back every morning. And he told me, "There's a man sitting in that chair staring at me and whispering all the time. I can't sleep when he does that." We transferred him out later that day, and I haven't touched that chair since.
Ooh.
Wow.
That, gives me goosebumps. That's so creepy.
Oh, that's freaky. This next story happened just in that same hospital just a few doors down.
Oh, God.
A couple of rooms down is a 4-bedder room. This room is also towards the end of the ward, and the nurses usually use this space for storage of spare equipment, furniture, and the like. If they really need the bed space, they would maybe open up the beds closer to the door, leaving the ones closer to the window empty. But one day, the hospital was, as usual, reaching maximum capacity, and we had no choice but to put a couple of patients in the beds next to the windows. I had 2 patients there, an older gentleman, Mr. B, and a younger guy, Mr. C. Mr. B had some complex surgery done and was flitting in and out of delirium. Mr. C just had a simple broken arm, which was already fixed. One morning we came by to check on Mr. B. He seemed alert enough and very calmly asked if he could change to another ward. I asked him why, and he told me that there were children playing outside and peering at him throughout the night from outside the window. My first instinct was to order some investigations to screen for delirium again, but suddenly Mr. C piped up from the bed across, saying he could also see the children outside the window every night, and to tell them to keep it down. We were on the 6th floor. There is a 6-story drop outside those windows, and my hospital does not have a children's ward.
Ooh, that's weird. Something going on with this floor.
Very weird. Oh, that's creepy.
Oh, that's so bizarre.
Very
Because at first
creepy.
it made me think of Black-Eyed Kids or something like that, but
Yes.
I don't know. This is different because they're presenting themselves this way. I don't know. This is bizarre.
This next one concerns call bells. We have this old block in the hospital which used to be the main building many moons ago. This old 5-story building has since relinquished its main block duties to the 13-story building just next to it, taking on a whole new role as a recovery block for patients who need an extra week or 2 of therapy to get back on their feet. The older block is really old, and while the wards have been refurbished with air conditioning and new furniture, computers, TVs, etc., you can still see a lot of the past still in the building. The floors are covered in these tiny little tiles popular in the 1960s. The lift is all kinds of creaky and slow. The hallways are dim and the lights like to flicker just for the heck of it. The plus side to these wards were that they were more spacious than the ones in the main block. Each room only had 1 bed to it, so no worries about having a noisy roommate. The walk there is also a good 10 minutes or so from the new main building, so whenever I did night shifts, which we did exceedingly often as junior doctors, I dreaded walking over to the recovery block. Something was always a little off about the place that gave me the creeps. I didn't know if it was that long dark walkway leading up to the block, which was just pitch black on either side of the path, so you felt like if you wandered a little off to the side, the darkness would just swallow you whole. Or if it was the dim, humid hallways that led to the wards, where you felt like someone was always watching you. I've caught myself turning around a couple of times before walking down these halls, because you really get this feeling like someone is staring at you. Because the lifts were always so slow, I would mostly take the stairs, which were a bit more airy since they just wound around this large airwell. But sometimes, if I looked back up the stairwell, I could almost swear I thought I saw someone darting back from the ledge, like someone afraid of getting caught. So I was in one of the wards there one evening, reviewing a patient. I was sitting at the nursing station with the nurse, going through some of the charts, when a call bell goes off. When the call bell goes off, there's an electronic sign in the corridor and the nursing station which tells you which bed requires assistance. So it said bed 27. The bell goes off again, and it's the same bed. I look at the nurse and ask if she's going to check on that patient since they've pressed the bell twice. and she said there's no one in that bed. So I'm a little creeped out now. But at the same time, I still need to check to make sure we haven't just forgotten someone in that room. Bed 27 is all the way at the end of the corridor, and I go down there with the nurse just to check. I mean, it could be another patient who wandered into the wrong room, but the nurse was right. There was no one in that room. A bit more than a little creeped out, I unplugged the call button from the wall. It could be malfunctioning anyway. I asked the nurse to get the technician in the next morning to check it out, since if it kept going off, the other patients might not get a good night's rest either. We head back to the nursing station, and no sooner had we sat down when the call bell went off again. Bed 27. I left the ward after that. The last I heard from a colleague, that room has been converted into a storeroom. A few years later, I was assigned a spare night call room in that block. These are rooms the doctors can use to sleep in if we are on night duty. It was the one and only time I was assigned this room, and mostly doctors who got it would not stay in it. I decided that having a room would be better than nothing, so I headed over with my stuff to catch a quick nap before my phone went off again about another issue to attend to. The rooms in this block were smaller than the ones in the main block, but they had a window at least. The ones in the new building didn't have windows, and it was a tiny bit like a prison cell. The room had a small single bed, a sink, and a chair for our bags. The window was quite large, 1 meter tall, maybe another 50 centimeters wide, at the foot of the bed, with the door closer to the head of the bed. That was pretty much it. I laid down to get some rest and just about drifted off when I heard someone talking in the room. It wasn't very loud, but it didn't sound like it was coming from outside. I couldn't really tell what they were saying, and I thought maybe I had butt-dialed someone in my sleep. Then I felt something heavy rest at the foot of the bed on the mattress. I opened my eyes, and the room was completely dark. So I fumbled for my phone to turn on the light. Just when I managed to pull my phone out from under the pillow, light spilled back into the room from the window. And it was just then I realized that the room could not have been totally dark at any time because the window had no curtain, and there was a street lamp outside with no trees or anything. So something had just been obscuring the entire window. I turned on the room light, and of course, nothing was there. I took my stuff and went to sleep in the office instead. Hospitals are really where you see or hear quite a fair bit of these sorts of stories, mostly from my patients telling me to tell that lady to stop walking in and out of that wall. It's very distracting. Or that there was a very big black shadow crawling on the floor on all fours, described to be as large as a person. The nurses, too, have many stories of mystery patients who walk into one of the bathrooms or storerooms only to disappear when the nurses follow them in. Very spooky stuff.
Ooh, weird. Oh God, hospitals are crazy places, man. I mean, what the hell? If you really think about it, a hospital's crazy. Too much going on in there.
Very crazy. And this next one was actually, it comes from his mother. His mother had told him this story. And this one's called Seventh Day. This story is from my mom, actually. Her mom passed away when she was in her first or second year of university from cancer. So I've never met her. But I've heard she's a force to be reckoned with. There is a belief in the Chinese tradition that the soul of the departed returns to their homes after 7 days. Some families may dust the floor with some powder or flour to catch their loved one's return. So my mom's story starts during my grandmother's wake. Around the 3rd day, she started dreaming of my grandmother. Initially, she would dream that my grandmother was calling out to her, but she could never figure out where the voice was coming from. But as the days went on, my grandmother would appear, asking my mom to follow her. My mom would always decline. Finally, on the 7th night, my mom dreamt that my grandmother drove over in her car. She called out to my mom to come and join her for a game of mahjong, that they needed 1 more player. You need 4 players for mahjong. My mom declined again, saying she was too sleepy and had to go to school. My grandmother got upset, insisting again to come with her. But my mom refused, much to her mom's annoyance. She got yelled at by my grandmother for being lazy before my grandmother told her, "If you aren't interested, I'll go look for my sister then. She would play with me." And she drove off, in the dream anyway. But the next morning, my mom got word that her aunt had passed away in her sleep. She wonders what would have happened if she had agreed to play mahjong that night. My grandfather passed away when I was 12. and we all piled into his house for the entire length of the wake. He was a very stern guy, and us kids didn't particularly enjoy his company. But we did enjoy his house, which had a huge garden and lots of space to run around. When he was still around, his passions seemed to be in gardening, smoking cigars, and scolding the grandkids and pinching our ears. It was a weird combination, but he wasn't really the regular grandpa either. On the 7th night of his wake, my step-grandma dusted talcum powder on the ground around the bedroom before she went to bed. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, she was awoken by the sound of water running in the ensuite bathroom. The bathroom door is just about 3 meters away from the bed, so it was clearly visible from where she was. She could see that the bathroom light was on, and there was some steam emanating from under the door, like someone was taking a really warm shower. She got up and summoned my mom and my uncle to the room, and they saw a set of large men's footprints in the powder heading from the bed to the bathroom. Definitely too large to be from my step-grandma, who was a much more petite lady, and no footprints leading out of the bathroom. My uncle knocked on the door and asked who was inside, but there was no response. He figured it may be my other uncle, and the water was just a little too loud for him to hear them outside, so they decided to wait it out and see who it was. A few minutes later, the sound of water stopped, and the light in the bathroom suddenly turned off. Then the door unlocked, but the door never opened. My uncle opened the door and turned the light back on. The bathroom was wet, like someone had just taken a shower, and there was hot steam lingering in the air. But again, there was nobody there. Wow.
Weird.
A fascinating tradition about the 7th day.
Yeah, I wonder, we'll have to look more into that because that is cool.
The powder reminds me, do you remember, I think it was the first Paranormal Activity where they lay like powder?
Right.
And there's like hoof marks in the...
Yes.
Yeah, that was spooky. But very fascinating. Benjamin, thank you so much. Incredible stories.
Yeah, thank you for sending those over.
Like a whole list of stories. That was really fascinating. I'm fascinated by this idea of the 7th day a loved one returns. Benjamin, once again, so thankful to have you as a listener, and incredible, incredible stories. Well, Maureen, good golly, I think that's all the stories we have.
That's going to wrap us up.
Wow, those were great.
We are always, as I said before, we are always accepting new personal stories like this. So feel free to reach out to us on social media, or you can email us at creepstreetpodcast@gmail.com at any time. We'll do this again in the wintertime, probably around Christmas. So please don't feel like you got to wait until then, though. You can send them earlier if you like.
That's right. Well, Maureen, why don't I list off the names of our top-tier Patreon subscribers?
Oh, please do.
Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the Oh-So-Suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Favilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Sir of Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Vuren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, and the Beast Benjamin Huang.
Wow. Thank you so much to all of our Patreon subscribers, but a special shout out to our top tier Patreon subscribers.
Yes.
We so appreciate you. Thank you for everything that you do. And just keep on keeping on. Keep being you.
That's right. Of course, like, rate, subscribe, whatever you listen to us on, hit us with the 5 stars or whatever that equivalent of 5 stars is. And, of course, evangelize the good name of Creep Street.
It really helps us get the word out for Creep Street, because we got some big plans for Creep Street that we need to spread the word about, baby.
Absolutely. Go forth and multiply. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
A good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.